Welcome to Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors, where we believe Benjamin Franklin's advice that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, both in finances and in your life. Every episode teaches you personal finance and long-term investing in simple terms. Now, here's your host, Jesse Kramer.
Welcome to Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors, episode 117. I'm Jesse Kramer. By day, I work at a fiduciary wealth management firm helping clients nationwide. You can learn more at bestinterest.blog/work. The link is in the show notes. And by night, I write the Best Interest blog and I host this podcast. I help busy professionals and retirees avoid mistakes and grow their wealth by simplifying their investing, their taxes, and their retirement. Later today, I'll be joined by Spencer Reese. Spencer is an Air Force veteran who reached financial independence and now shares advice mainly for other military vets. But it is really interesting how retiring from the military shares so much in common with a more traditional 9-to-5 retirement, especially when it comes to some of the non-financial aspects of life transitions. Life transitions like retirement can be so much harder than they appear on the outside. And Spencer and I made sure that even if you're not a military service member or a veteran, you're still going to find a lot of value in Spencer's story and in some of his lessons learned. But first, we have a review of the week. This one is from He Mojo Filter, who said, "Meaningful content delivered concisely. Jesse is one of my favorite content creators in the personal finance space. His style is matter-of-fact and straightforward, and he explains complex financial concepts in easy-to-understand language. Jesse helps build confidence through improving financial literacy, and he focuses on data and facts, not personal opinions." Well, Mojo, thank you for the kind words, and I'll be happy to send you a super soft podcast t-shirt. Just drop me an email to jesse@bestinterest.blog. And listeners, if you have a question, a concern, or feedback that I can answer, especially for a future Ask Me Anything AMA episode, you can send those questions to my email, jesse@bestinterest.blog. Before we get to Spencer today, I want to share two bigger thoughts with you. The first one is about the only constant in retirement, and the second one is about something that I'm calling the retiree's financial decathlon. Your only retirement constant will be change. It's like that Pete Seeger song or the Bird song, to everything there's a season, turn, turn, turn. A time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance. Some of us retire at 70, others retire at 40, but no matter your retirement age, your retirement will change over time. It evolves. It's not just a point in time. It's not just one age. It's decades long, and it's going to change. At times, it's literally seasonal. I think of my parents. My parents love to garden, so spring through late summer, it's their number one retirement pastime is out in the gardens. But their daily schedule undergoes a big change in winter. Turn, 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 like the bird said. Now, what else changes? Well, you get older, pretty obviously. I was speaking to a client recently about the go-go, the slow-go, and the no-go phases of a typical retirement. They took a trip to Europe together. And after they got back in Italy, I think they were on their feet for 5 or 6 hours a day, putting in 6, 8, 10 miles of walking a day. And they felt a little less go-go and a little more slow-go than before. And that trip kind of brought it into focus. What else changes? Well, everyone else gets older too. I think this is a really interesting one. Your grandkids, I've seen this in my own life with my parents and their grandchildren, my daughter, my nieces and nephews. The grandkids go from diapers to kindergarten. And next thing you know, they're kind of too cool for you. And then they're off to college and beyond, all in the span of your retirement. Your own children are probably going to go from young professionals to married with kids. And eventually they'll become empty nesters, all within your retirement. So these other people in your life, they are changing too. Your health rhythms will change. Even if you start retirement feeling great, your body changes. A bum knee will alter those daily walks, will alter those golf habits. A doctor's order will shift your diet or exercise. For some retirees, the biggest health change is simply more doctor's appointments in the first place, filling your calendar. Friendships and social circles will change. Friends will move away, chasing their grandkids. Other friends are going to pass away. Other people might actually surprise you and get closer. Your people will change over time, and with that comes new rhythms of connection or loneliness, especially if you don't adapt. From the Stacking Benjamins show, Joe Saul Seahigh frequently shares a story about his friend whose main goal was to retire to the mountains, which I think a lot of us can relate to. Mountains are beautiful. I'm going to retire to the mountains. So he had decades of hard work, years of planning, and he made it happen. He retired to a beautiful home in the remote mountains. And then within months of doing so, he realized he had completely physically isolated himself from all his previous social circles. And he couldn't wait to undo his choice of moving to the mountains and move back to civilization. So that's a pretty interesting anecdote. Finances and markets change too. The 4% rule, it's only a guidepost. Your retirement withdrawal strategy will change over time. It has to be dynamic. Markets don't move in a straight line. Inflation, tax laws change. Even just your own spending patterns will shift and will change how you approach your money. Your community and environment will change too. Your neighborhood, your town, your city will change. A coffee shop closes, a new park opens, neighbors will come and go. Or maybe you move yourself, downsizing, moving closer to family, chasing warmer winters, becoming a snowbird. Our neighbors moved just last month. They're probably 70 years old. And they're still in our town, but they just wanted to downsize out of the family home where they raised their kids, the 2,500 square foot home, into a smaller 1,300 square foot, one level ranch style home. Very common. And then what's kind of funny, the new neighbors who moved in after them are also retirees. They're also about 70 years old. They're moving 6 hours north from New Jersey. Why? Well, to chase after 3 of their adult kids who happen to settle in Greater Rochester and their multiple grandkids, all of whom are close by. So anyway, different reasons for moving, all for retirees in this particular case. Your energy, your priorities will change. Your mileage may vary. At 60, you'll be up for adventure. At 70, a slower routine starts to feel better. And at 80, you're only focusing on simplicity. Again, your mileage may vary on that, but the point is the things that you want from retirement will evolve. And that's not a bad thing. The juice you squeeze from daily life will also ebb and flow. And it'll ebb more than flow as time goes on. Technology certainly changes. I know it sounds like a small thing, but it's pretty huge. And it's probably bigger than it's ever been before. I mean, just look at this example. How long do you want your retirement to be? I think would a fair number fall between 20 years and 40 years? Well, let's use that range. The World Wide Web is 35 years old. Wi-Fi is 25 years old. It became commonplace, at least here in the USA, starting about 20 years ago. iPhones are 18 years old. Simple stuff like GPS, maps, FaceTime video calls, streaming TV shows, even text message. These weren't like proliferated, ubiquitous, popular technologies until the last 10 to 15 years. So technology will keep changing by leaps and bounds, all within the time frame of your single retirement. So adapting to that technology can either expand or limit your personal world. Purpose and meaning can change a lot too for retirees. Some retirees discover purpose in volunteering, in mentoring, in a faith community. Others lose steam after the honeymoon period of their retirement, and they need to reinvent some way to find fulfillment. And again, 20 or 30 or 40 years is a really long time. That fulfillment cycle can turn and turn and turn over and again. We all know people who have reinvented themselves throughout their 20s and 30s and 40s. And I don't think that ceases just because we're in our 50s and 60s and beyond. It might slow down for some people, but it speeds up for others. It rarely halts altogether. So no matter your age, no matter your retirement plans, I believe the only constant in retirement will be change. And now for this other idea I alluded to before, the retiree's financial decathlon. While that first little stanza, the first little topic focused more on the softer side of retirement, this is going to focus on some of the nuts and bolts finances of retirement. If you're not familiar with Peter Attia, that's how I'm going to start this little story. Peter Attia is a doctor, a scientist, an author, and all-around health advocate. And he came up with this concept that he calls the centenarian decathlon. And it's a framework that asks, what 10 physical tasks do I want to be able to do at age 100? Centenarian, 100. So very lofty. What 10 things do I want to be able to do at age 100? And from there, Peter Attia works backward, identifying the strength and mobility and endurance that we need today at our current age in order for us to kind of age gracefully into those goals in the future at age 100. So this decathlon, it reframes fitness as preparation for longevity and for independence, not necessarily for pure performance or aesthetics. The idea is kind of simple. We train today for the functional life that we want decades from now. And my thought was, well, can we do the same thing for retirement finances? What are the 10 most important aspects of a financially sound retirement, and how do we start preparing for that future today? So the 10 items in my retiree decathlon. What matters in retirement? It's crucial to focus on, yes, family, lifestyle, purpose, all those other soft aspects of retirement. If you haven't listened to episode 106 of this podcast, it's a really good one to listen to that focuses heavily on that side of retirement. In fact, most post-retirees actually end up realizing that the soft stuff of retirement is much more important than the financial nuts and bolts. But nevertheless, I'm going to focus on the finances for today for this retiree decathlon, the 10 nuts and bolts tasks that we should start today and work on throughout retirement. The first one is to understand your future paycheck, or, in quotes, paycheck. Your cash inflow during your career is really easy to understand. It's mostly your paycheck. It's really simple. But obviously, there's a significant change in retirement. No more paycheck. All pre-retirees need to understand where their future retirement paycheck will be coming from. Some people assume it's 100% from Social Security. Other people assume it'll come 100% from their 401k savings. The truth is usually more nuanced. Your retirement paycheck will likely have multiple sources. It will change over time. It'll be unique to you. It should be optimized for your lifestyle, for your long-term sustainability, for tax minimization, other things like that. And even if you're years away from pulling the retirement trigger, it's not too early to consider where your retirement paycheck will come from. On that note, if you're interested, I wrote a free PDF white paper. It's called The Step-by-Step Guide to Building Your Retirement Paycheck. And if you sign up for my email list, you can get a free copy of that PDF sent straight to your inbox. You can sign up at bestinterest.blog at the homepage, or you can follow the link in the show notes to this article, The Retiree's Financial Decathlon. And there are multiple places in the article where you can sign up. You can download your free copy of the step-by-step guide to building your retirement paycheck. But now on to event number 2 of our decathlon, allocate and build your portfolio. It's fine advice to say, just save more money. But we all need to dig a little bit deeper. How much should we save? How do we allocate those dollars into different asset classes, stocks, bonds, etc.? And then why do we make those allocation decisions? What assumptions should we make for future returns on investment? Like how will our money grow? And then how do those allocation and growth assumptions change over time? Your portfolio will be a significant part of your retirement lifestyle, your retirement finances. It might be the only part of your retirement paycheck for a few years if you plan on retiring early, right? You won't be able to turn on Social Security yet. So your portfolio is going to be probably one of the only inputs into your retirement paycheck. So we need to focus on the allocation and the structure of our portfolio. Event number 3 in this decathlon is to understand your Social Security strategy. On its face, you have to decide when and how to claim Social Security for a maximum lifetime benefit. But yes, it's more nuanced than that. So I suggest asking a lot of different questions. I wrote an article, I'll link in the show notes. It's called When Should I Take Social Security? And I suggest asking questions like, what's your family health history? Should you delay Social Security in order to make it into more of a longevity insurance for your plan? Do you plan on part-time work during retirement? How might spousal benefits and or survivor benefits impact your family and your specific Social Security strategy? How risky, how threatening is the sequence of returns risk for you? And will early Social Security claiming actually alleviate that risk? Maybe just one of the basic ones, one of the more basic ones is Social Security like this fundamental pillar of your retirement? Or if it disappeared, do you have enough money saved up that you don't really need Social Security in the first place? It's not that important. All those kind of questions can help us provide more color in determining when you should take Social Security and what your family Social Security strategy needs to be. So that's the 3rd event of this decathlon. The 4th event is to develop a tax-efficient saving and drawdown strategy. There is a generally accepted retirement withdrawal order of operations to minimize retirement taxation. If you're curious what that generally accepted order of operations is, I suggest reading the article that I linked in the show notes called Your Retirement Withdrawal Order of Operations. But it begs the question, is there a tax-efficient accumulation strategy? Yes, but it involves forecasting some uncertain futures, especially around tax rates and investment returns, and then acting now on that limited information. That's why the best strategies are it's a dynamic year-by-year evaluation. It's a decision tree rooted in what we know now, but then branching out to evolve based on how today's facts might change. So you should ask yourself these kind of questions every year. What's my income and what's my marginal tax rate this year? What tax advantage accounts are available to me this year? What does my current tax diversification look like? Meaning, do I have monies in traditional pre-tax buckets, in Roth post-tax buckets, and in taxable buckets? So that's that tax diversification. What do I expect future tax rates to be for me personally, based on my income, future income, but also for the broader tax system? And then last, what non-tax considerations might impact these decisions? Things like liquidity, simplicity, employer matching, getting an inheritance, etc. So all of those play into developing a tax-efficient saving and a tax-efficient drawdown strategy. The 5th event in this decathlon is to plan for healthcare costs. In episode 108 of Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors, I answered a listener's AMA question by diving deep into healthcare costs before, during, and then after retirement, meaning, Medicare, kind of the long-term play of retirement healthcare. Because yes, retirement healthcare can be a scary proposition, but I would urge you to consider this. Millions of people have walked this retirement path before you, and their lessons, good, bad, or ugly lessons, are out there for you to learn from. More specifically, we do know, it's been figured out how healthcare costs fit into a broader retirement financial plan. That information is readily available. So the work that remains for you is to consider how you'll tackle that question in your specific life. The answers are out there. We just need to put in the work to consider how they apply to our lives. Event number 6 in the Decathlon is to make an estate plan. And I'd ask you, is preparing for retirement and preparing for death, are those two separate tasks? Ultimately, I see them both as thinking ahead and doing so quite prudently. So as you age, as your family grows, as your balance sheet becomes more complicated, it becomes increasingly essential to review and revise your estate plan. Are your loved ones protected from the vicissitudes of fate? Who will receive assets upon your death, and in what amounts, and with what stipulations? Are those gifts tax optimized? Those kind of questions. Do your loved ones know about your plans? Have you communicated with them? And if not, why not? All those questions are really important, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of making and editing, reviewing, and revising your estate plan. Event number 7 is to change or alter your portfolio over time. So again, one of my foundational financial planning and investment management principles is to think about goals first, and then timelines to those goals, and then the appropriate risk for those timelines, and then the appropriate assets based on that risk level. So what are the goals for your money? What are your preferred or required timelines to reach those goals? How much risk can you afford to take across those timelines? And then what assets can you invest in based on that amount of risk? As you age, your goals might change. Your timelines will undoubtedly change. Time is going by. It's the only constant, right? And your portfolio should adjust in concert with those facts. Surprisingly, you might even reach a point where your timelines are no longer actually your timelines. Instead, you'll invest based on your estate plan, based on the timelines of your descendants, of your heirs, or of charities that you plan on bequesting money to. It's not uncommon to see a person's recommended risk start high in their younger years, glide lower into retirement, but then eventually increase again toward the end of their life. Event number 8 is to stress test your plan. Will your financial plan survive market volatility, inflation, longevity, or the other curveballs that life can throw your way? It's worth asking those kind of what-if questions. There are various software packages and various professional experts who can help you stress test your plan. Event number 9 is to consolidate and simplify. What's the point of compounding wealth if it also comes with compounding stress? Most retirees see a big psychic benefit from simplifying their financial lives. It's a bit like cleaning your house. Now, what's the best way to do it? Probably by keeping it clean in the first place. But if you've come to the point where your financial plan, your retirement plan, your financial picture is a little bit out of control, there are many ways to consolidate, simplify, and just end up with a less stressful, a more simple plan going forward. And then event number 10 of our Decathlon, it's a one-word event. I'll pause and let you take a little guess at what this one word is. The word is spend. The last event on the Retiree Decathlon is to spend your money. Spending and saving are these two separate muscles, and too often a frugal retiree will enter their golden years with a massive savings muscle, but with atrophied spending muscles. So an important thing to do, even before retirement, is to start flexing, start exercising your spending muscle. If you feel like a habitual saver, if spending money gives you anxiety, if your only pair of pants is 17 years old and fraying at the seams, spend. Start now. You don't have to go crazy, but you shouldn't wait until retirement. You can go out and buy a new pair of pants. So thank you for listening to that Retiree's Financial Decathlon. I hope it was interesting and entertaining for you. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. You probably know that I love listener-inspired content, but this is my first listener-inspired advertisement. Frank asked me, in short, Jesse, is there a best time to start working with you as a client? And the short answer is yes. There are two ideal times. One is at the beginning of a new year for probably some pretty obvious reasons, but the second one is right about now, September and October. It's the perfect time for year-end tax planning to ensure you find the correct balance of Roth conversions, tax gain or tax loss harvesting, making charitable gifts, spreading out any portfolio changes over multiple tax years, or whatever other tax dials we can turn for you. Working backward from the December 31st tax deadline, the time to start those initial conversations is right now, August, September, maybe into early October. You want to give yourself and us enough runway to make sure we get this right for you. So if you're interested in starting a conversation with me and my colleagues, you can go to bestinterest.blog/work and fill out the form there. Again, that's on my blog on the Work with Jesse page. The address is bestinterest.blog/work and fill out the form. And with that, we're now going to introduce Spencer Reese onto the podcast. Spencer separated from the U.S. Air Force in 2022 after 12 years of active duty, and he helps military service members mainly and their families through his book, his podcast, his course, and website, which all fall under the branding umbrella of the Military Money Manual. So if you hear us say Military Money Manual, that is really Spencer's brand. His book, his podcast, his course, and his website all fall under that brand. And again, all those media channels are dedicated to enriching military families, helping them reach financial independence as quickly as possible. I know most of my audience, you're probably not in the military. You're not a military veteran. There are so many parallels, especially when it comes to the life transitions, and you'll hear Spencer and I dig into that today. So without further ado, here is Spencer Reese from the Military Money Manual. Spencer, I'm glad we were able to do this, man. And something that I was thinking about, one potential place to start this conversation is that, my listeners are used to me hearing me say that financial planning is a function of specifics, right? It's your life, your family, your income, whatever is unique and specific to you. But to that end, I'm thinking about your expertise in the world that you're coming from, some of the military world, where there are some, it's kind of funny to think about it as unique generalities. So it's like a generality to military service members, but it's this very unique thing that separates military service members and their finances from, say, the civilians, the general populace. So at some point, and maybe we can do it right off the start, what are some stories that you have when it just comes to some of those unique financial aspects of military service? Is that too broad a place to start?
No, that's a great place to start, I think, Jesse. Thanks for the softball softball start there. We were talking about this just before we hit record, but there is a universality between civilian money and military money. The name of your podcast, long-term investing, that's what I've been talking about over at my website and my podcast for years now. But the vehicles that we use to do that might be a little bit different. We might say TSP, thrift savings plan, instead of 401k. But the basics of it, the fundamentals of it are exactly the same as a civilian 401k. So what are the big fundamental differences that you'll see on the military side? Well, one thing is that you might have, on the enlisted side, you might have lower income for a longer period of time. So you might have to adjust basically your expectations if you're going to stay enlisted for a full 20-year career, especially compared to an officer in the same branch. You're just going to be making a lot less money, and probably towards the end of your career, the difference might be as much as half. You might be only making 50% as an officer. So that's one thing there, is this, you have to kind of gauge your expectations of your income potential while you're on the enlisted side. But that being said, there's still a tremendous opportunity to live below your means and save and invest and build wealth while you're on active duty to set yourself up for a very nice transition to the civilian sector. I think one of the other things that really comes up with military service members is a lot of times it's all they know, right? They join right out of high school, right out of college. It's their first and their only real adult job for maybe just one enlistment, right? 2 to 4 years, or maybe even longer. Like pilots have a 10-year commitment, and that starts after the training's done. So now you're looking at 12 years, and that's after you graduate university. So you're in your mid-30s before you ever have an opportunity to really think about what you're doing and what you want to do next.
What kind of day-to-day stuff is covered in the military, Spencer? Shelter, right? Am I living in the barracks? And is that covered? Food? So for the enlisted, for the officers, they might be getting maybe lower pay than maybe some of their corporate civilian counterparts. I don't know. But then what parts of the lifestyle are actually covered by the government, by the military?
Yeah, so you're always going to have your housing covered in some way. So if you're provided government housing, whether that's the barracks or housing on base, you're going to have your housing covered by the government. And if there isn't housing available on base, or if you're high enough rank, or you're married, that's another interesting factor of military service, is especially on the younger enlisted side, there's a big push to get married, because as soon as you get married, you get to move out of the barracks and you get to go live in your own house and live your own life. So that creates this financial incentive, and your pay goes up too, because you'll start collecting BAH, basic allowance for housing, with a dependent, which is higher than the basic allowance for housing without a dependent. There's this financial incentive to get married, which is probably much more intense than the pressure a civilian might feel, where you might get there's a tax advantage, right? Married filing jointly versus single, but most people aren't really thinking about the income tax implications of getting married. Although listeners of our show, our two shows might be thinking about that. So your housing's always covered. On the enlisted side, a lot of times you have access to a chow hall or, some kind of food, usually discounted, and you either get, a card, a meal card. Everybody receives a basic allowance for sustenance, a BAS, and that's only like a couple $100 a month though. But for most, this is another interesting thing, is even though enlisted pay might be quite low compared to their civilian counterparts, it can be quite good to someone who comes in with only a high school education, and you get to learn a skill, you get to learn a trade, and all that's paid for. And then, oh, by the way, you're going to get a GI Bill as well. So now if you want to go to college, you can do that. But you can also just go to college while you're on active duty. There's a thing called tuition assistance, and that will pay for, the numbers change, but let's say up to like $4,000 a year of college tuition. So there's an opportunity, there's a tremendous opportunity to essentially upskill yourself and make yourself more valuable. And you can use those skills while you're on active duty, or you can transition to the civilian world eventually, apply those skills, especially, if you're in IT or any kind of computer connected cyber field, you can get all your certificates, and then you can come out and you can go, walk straight into Microsoft or Apple or any of the Google, any of the big IT companies in the world. They'll be glad to have you because you're qualified and you've been doing it for real while you've been on active duty. So yes, there's a lot of things that the government covers. And then there's a lot of things that, because like on the enlisted side, the classic mistake that a lot of people make is they buy too much car, because they say, well, okay, I've got my housing covered. I got a study paycheck, and I want to go get the 2026 Camaro that's, $80,000, and it's right out the lot. And, oh, the guy gave me a great deal, 96-month loan, only at, 19% interest. And you're like, oh, boy, you just paid $200,000 for an $80,000 car.
No.
Yeah, you're in trouble. So that's the interesting thing, but it happens on the officer side too. We call it the lieutenant mobile, where as soon as people graduate the Air Force Academy or any of the military academies or ROTC, they think, oh, I gotta, an officer drives a nice car. I gotta go buy the BMW, or I think right now it's the Toyota Tacoma. They're just snapping them up, and there goes another $80,000 on a vehicle. And it's like, okay, I mean, if that's what you want to do, but can I interest you in something that's a little bit cheaper and, explain to you the value of compounding interest? And all of a sudden it's like, as an officer, like you could easily be a millionaire in 10 years. But a lot of people don't think about that.
I mean, it sounds like you're kind of pointing it out, but I'd never really thought about it before. There is such a natural hierarchy of rank in the military. I mean, is there some sort of like keeping up with the lieutenants, keeping up with the colonels? Like, especially as you move up in the ranks, you kind of start to look around. Do you feel like you need to spend more money to keep up with the equally ranked officers?
It goes both ways. I think some people see that as the game to play, and they keep, upskilling or up-ranking the vehicle, or, the kids go to the Montessori school instead of the school on base. And, the lifestyle creep is real. And whether it's because they're comparing themselves to their peers. I mean, the crazy thing is it's the most transparent organization in the world. Everybody knows how much everybody is paid. Now, if there's a civilian spouse, right, you don't know how much they're getting paid, but the pay scale is set by Congress and is publicly available. So how much you as a captain is making, how much your colonel boss is making, how much the airman that's working for you is making. And what I find is that it usually splits around, on the officer side, around the captain rank, where you have some people realize, like, this is a stupid status game that I don't need to play, and I can play a different game. And those are the people who rank up, and eventually they're colonels who are driving the 20-year-old Honda Civic, and they're like, I got nothing to prove. Like, I get all my status and recognition from my job, right, and from my rank or from what I do for the organization, and I don't need a Porsche or a BMW 7 Series to to show off. Like a lot of times the cheapest, rattiest looking car in the parking lot is the commander's car.
Yeah.
So they're just like, this isn't a game I want to play. But like I said, it does split. And so you have some people who say, okay, now I'm starting to make, it's about captain, where you're starting to make six figures as an officer, over $100,000 a year. And there are some people who are like, okay, now I'm making the real money and I can really start upgrading my lifestyle. And, it's crazy, but we've talked to people who have listened to the podcast, and they've been in as officers for 10 years or 15 years or almost even 20 years, and they're still living paycheck to paycheck. And you just want to like grab them and be like, what are you doing? Like, if they're not stressed about it, okay, fine, whatever. But they're always stressed about it, right? Like there's never someone who's living paycheck to paycheck that is enjoying that situation when the car repair bill comes in and you're like, I have negative $10 in my checking account. How am I supposed to pay for this?
Where do you find in those cases, where's the money going? Because I mean, we talked about the cars, but from the layperson, right? Here I am, the ignorant layperson looking in. I think to myself, well, most of the, if we think of the big three as transportation, food, and housing, well, two of those three are covered, or at least covered in large part. So then, I mean, is there just a lot of like spending on toys, for lack of a better term, or where do you see that money is usually going?
Yeah, toys, lifestyle, alcohol, maybe.
Yeah.
Vacations, possibly, spending on the kids or the family. But like you said earlier, with financial planning, it being a very individualized sport, the reasons people get into trouble is always individualized, right? And most of the time, it's just because there's a lack of communication with the spouse, or there's a lack of vision for what, I say spouse, but it could be a single person as well, where they just don't have a vision for their life, or they never had a role model. Usually that's what it is. It's usually money was not a topic that you talked about at home, and then you don't know any different, and so you just keep doing it. And people tend to treat money as something that comes and then something that goes, and they don't realize that all you need to do is carve off 5, 10, 15% of that stream and invest it in the long term and let compounding interest go to work. And nobody's ever sat down and taught them that. If you could, that's why I started the podcast and started the website and wrote the book, was because I wanted to be that resource of, look, like, here's what to do. And also here's why you do it. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of times people are like, why would I save more than 5% on my TSP? It's only matched up to 5%. You just want to show them and be like, look, like living paycheck to paycheck is painful, and like not having money in the bank means that you don't have options. And so when you have more options, you have more freedom, in general, you're happier. And if that's not the game we're playing, then that's fine. We can play a different game. But for most people, I mean, that's really what they want, right? They want freedom, they want choices, they want happiness.
And so do their spouses. And thinking back, you mentioned something in that answer, Spencer, about communication with spouses. And again, forgive my lack of nomenclature, but whether it's a deployment or active duty, if those are not synonyms, you can probably inform me and my audience on exactly what those mean. But I think to myself, well, boy, if someone is spending, it's one thing if they're living on base with their spouse. But what if two spouses are a world apart because one of them is deployed, and now all of a sudden you still have, I mean, obviously they have bigger fish to fry at the moment than thinking probably about their household finances if they're deployed, but someone has to be thinking about it, and now you have this challenge in communication. I mean, did you live through that yourself, or do you have stories to share from that angle?
The story I would share is from my personal experience. It became positive, but initially, when my wife and I got married, I'd only been on active duty for a year, and I was still in pilot training. So I was still going through my initial training course. So I wasn't even I didn't have my wings. I wasn't a real pilot yet. And I kind of showed her like how I was budgeting and like how much money we had coming in and how much money we had going out. I was living paycheck to paycheck, because she would be like, okay, well, we just got paid $1,000. And I'm like, right, but I have to pay off the credit card bill from last month, which was $1,000. And she's like, so we have no money. I was like, no, like we're going to get another $1,000 in 2 weeks. My phrase was always, just wait till next paycheck. And she was like, I can't live that like that. that is not gonna work for us.
Good for her.
Well, it's funny because, I became the face and the voice behind the military money manual. But if I'm being honest, a lot of the ideas and the motivation came from her. And really, I'll give her a lot of credit for fixing my personal financial situation, because I was living paycheck to paycheck, and it was painful. It sucked. And initially we had, every dollar was allocated to a job, which is good, but we each got $20 every 2 weeks, and that was our spending money. Like that was the money that you could decide whatever you wanted to do with it. $20. And this was this was not 100 years ago, right? This was 15 years ago. So it didn't go very far, and it sucked, and it was painful. And a lot of that was because I was obsessed with paying off my student loans. We were putting a third of my income essentially towards paying off my student loans. And we paid them off very early. It caused a lot of friction, but it also forced us to learn to communicate really efficiently. And so when I was on deployment, so I deployed 3 times supporting operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, we were always checking in with each other. We knew how much money, we both had access to our checking account. She was home, so she was in charge of the bills, but like almost all of our bills were on auto pay, and all of our investments were on automatic transfer. And so there was really, other than her just making sure that she didn't spend too much on groceries or going out to eat, her hobbies are relatively cheap. There really wasn't anything for us to talk about. We had set up a system. And I think that's the critical thing that I would want someone who's listening to this podcast, whether they're civilian or military, is create systems. And yes, you do need to check in with your partner, and you do need to communicate. And you, especially when you're setting up the system, you need to have that communication and decide what are your values? What is important to you? What do you want to spend your money on together? And how much money do you want for yourself so that you can spend on whatever you want? But when you're setting up those systems, it's extremely important to communicate with each other. And when you we used to say going out the door, right? That's the phrase that we would use when we were going on deployment. You want to have it set up such that if you don't have communication, right, you don't have internet for a couple days or a couple weeks. During the Iraq war, there was guys and gals out, in Iraq and Afghanistan who didn't have internet for months, like literally just communicating by letters. That can be pretty tough. And, today we've got Starlink and all these other services where you'd have to be pretty remote to not have internet contact for like a month, let's say. Even a month, could your plan survive for a month, right? Like if you went off the grid for 30 days, would your bills be paid? Would your investments happen automatically? Would the rent be paid? And if the answer to that is no, then it's like, all right, let's talk. Let's make a plan. Let's figure this out.
It's a great test, that month away, that weeks away, that quarter away test. Like I can think about myself, or I can think about people I work with, and depending on that length of time, I think it's understandable that maybe a few things start to fall through the cracks. But at the very least, it's, can you go, for the civilians, can you go take that 2-week vacation with nothing falling through the cracks? Exactly right. Could you go away for a month? Could you take summer off without anything falling through the cracks? Those are questions worth considering. And I think the closer you get to perfection on that axis, I think more people would be better served if they moved in that direction for sure. But you kind of struck at something there, whether it was early in your relationship, your behavioral differences with your wife, or whether it was later on where you said okay, we need to systematize this and try to take some of our behavioral shortcomings just out of the equation altogether. I'd love to dive down that rabbit hole a little bit more, Spencer, are there any kind of repeated behavioral traps that you just found, yes, they're general behavior traps that affect all of us in personal finance and we can all learn lessons from it, but you see them as just being especially common for military families?
I think for military families, the most common traits I see are those of avoiders. So by that, I mean, it's usually not a will problem, right? They usually want to be better with money, but it's a skills problem. They never got the training. They never saw it modeled by their family or their parents. And then they marry someone who also doesn't have those skills and probably also has the will, but they just can't bridge the gap because they don't know who to turn to. And I mean, the great thing is the military does offer a lot of free resources to service members. So I'll just throw out a couple. Military OneSource, so that's sponsored by the Department of Defense. You can go to militaryonesource.com, I think it is, but just Google it, Military OneSource. Free financial counseling there, specific to your situation. So you'll tell them, hey, this is what we're struggling with, or this is what we want to know about. Like, they're not going to give you great investment advice other than you should contribute to your TSP. And they're not going to tell you like which funds to select inside your TSP. If you want to see stuff about that, check out my website, but they will be able to just like have that budget, paycheck, that communication, and that, just kind of that initial like rip the Band-Aid off moment where you go to your spouse and you say, look, like, I don't know about this money stuff. I don't think you know about this money stuff either. Maybe skip that part, but you can just talk about yourself and be like, I want to be more confident with money. In the Air Force, we call it the Family Service Member and Family Readiness Center. And you can go there and you can sit down with a real person face to face, and they'll have you build a budget. They'll have you, talk about, okay, like what are the 3 big expenses of most American households? Housing, transportation, and food. And like you said, for the military, well, food's mostly covered. Housing's mostly covered unless you're renting something that's way above your housing allowance. And so then your only factor that you really should worry about there is transportation. And so many times military service members make the mistake of buying too much transportation for their rank, for their paycheck. And if they could just not make that one single error, they'd be so much better off. They'd just have so much more room to maneuver with their money, with their paycheck. That's the kind of the overarching theme I see for military families is it's usually 2 avoiders who just don't have the skills. And because they're avoiding addressing the money issues, they don't ever get the will really either. So I think the best thing to do would be to go to your partner and say, look, I want to get a handle on this money thing. And I want us to stop living paycheck to paycheck, or I want us to get out of debt, right? There's probably some part of your money story that you're like, man, like that, why do I have to send $1,000 a month to my student loans? Like, there's got to be a way to fix this. And just go to your spouse and be like, imagine if we had $1,000 more a month. I mean, for some couples, it might be, imagine if we had $100 more a month. Wouldn't it be nice if we could like go out to Olive Garden and not worry about it? Or, go out, like buy some beers and drinks and invite people over on the weekends. And just kind of like starting the conversation with a positive, and then them being like, yeah, that sounds great. How are we going to do that? And like I said, Military One Source, Airmen and Family Readiness Center, the Navy, the Army, they all have their own places on post or on base. And if you don't know who to start with, just go to Military One Source and they'll find like the resources and they'll point you exactly where to go. But you can even chat with them. I mean, you don't have to sit on the phone and talk to them. I know everybody these days just likes to go through the chat window, and you can do that. Like they even have email, so you can exchange emails if you want to. But there's so many free resources out there, and it's such a shame to watch military families continue to avoid the problem when they're given so many opportunities and so many resources. I have, success stories of enlisted millionaires, who are becoming millionaires like well before they reach military retirement of 20 years of service. Airmen who have saved over $100,000 after just a 4-year enlistment term. And I mean, are these extreme examples? Are these outliers? Yeah, they are. But they're also proving the point that, okay, maybe you can't have $100,000 in 4 years, but I bet you could have $40,000. And if that sounds crazy to you, like the data's out there and you are getting paid enough to make that happen. It's just a lot of it is look at your lifestyle, cut out the fat, and focus on your opportunities to make additional income, which, like you were saying, deployments, not only is it an opportune time to have those communication questions and discussions with your partner, but you have the opportunity where now when you're deployed, all your food is free, all your housing is free. You're going to continue to collect housing allowance for the station. If you have a dependent back at your duty station, you're going to continue to get housing allowance for them, but there's nothing to say that they can't downsize, right? Like they can move all their stuff into storage and move back home with their family, which depending on your family situation might not be ideal. So don't do that, but they're still going to have expenses. But when you're deployed, you don't have any expenses. Your income goes up and you're making tax-free pay usually if you're deployed to a combat zone. There's tremendous opportunity there to get way ahead. And I just saw a post on Reddit the other day. I think a guy's on a 9-month or 12-month deployment. And the first 3 months, he paid off all his auto loans. He paid off all his student loans. And he's like, okay, what do I do next? And it's like, all right, man, let's like max out your TSP, Roth IRA. Okay, what's next? Taxable brokerage. Let's go. Like you can literally change your life around in a single deployment. And I think so many service members just let it go to waste. And They don't stay, and it doesn't, like, you don't have to stay focused on the goal. You just have to set up a system when you first get out there, and then you can worry about, what you're actually doing on that deployment, and let your money take care of itself.
Yeah. It's interesting that you point out that because especially maybe the earlier career service members, like you alluded to, I think you said, Spencer, that like once you reach captain, that's when you first hit maybe 6 figures worth of income. So before that, you're on 5 figures of income. And if you do make that really common mistake that you pointed out, which is just like buying too much car, you've got the money, so you decide to spend it on a car. Like we all know that Camaro example that you pointed out, that buying too much car and getting too bad of a loan on that car is easily a 5-figure mistake. It might even sneak into a 6-figure mistake over many years. And when you're quote unquote only making 5 figures, you can't afford 5 and 6-figure mistakes like that. And if instead if people could make the better choice up front, prevent that mistake, save that money, put it in their TSP, it really is the difference between kind of like floundering throughout your military career and maybe pivoting post-career and being like, I don't have too much to show for my military career. I didn't save that much, versus pivoting post-military career and being that millionaire or having that flexibility to do whatever you want after the military. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. I still remember it was 2019, and a guy from Fidelity came in to speak to my then employer about personal finance in general and about our 401k plan in particular. There were 60 or so of us who attended, mostly 50 plus years old, clearly with retirement on their minds. And nothing against this individual from Fidelity, but unfortunately, the guy just didn't really know what he was talking about. It ended up being a major disappointment. And a bunch of my colleagues afterwards said, in short, man, we're really thirsty for good financial retirement information. Where do we go find it? Now, does that sound true, listeners, for you and your colleagues? Last year, either in person or via Zoom, I spoke to about 800 employees at 11 different organizations, sometimes about personal finance in general, sometimes about specifics of their retirement plans, sometimes about the nitty-gritty details of Social Security and withdrawal planning and retirement math. The point being, if you're interested in inviting me to come talk money to you, to your colleagues, where you work, that is absolutely something I'm interested in talking to you about. Simply drop me an email to jesse@bestinterest.blog and let's start a conversation. And let's actually pivot and talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about what post-service life looks like, because I can just see all these parallels between the transition to retirement for all civilians, which is something I talk a lot about, against the transition to post-service life for military members, whether that means actual retirement for them or simply a transition to a different career. But I'm really curious, like, what are some of the biggest sticking points, financial or otherwise, that you've seen when it comes to transitioning from active duty to post-service life?
Well, I'm gonna flip the question back on you, Jesse, because I want to hear what you have to say. But I'm gonna frame it. I transitioned out of the service before I was eligible for a military retirement, but I did all the classic veteran mistakes, right? So I didn't have a job lined up when I got out because I thought my side business was going to be enough. And on the income side, yes, it was enough. But on the purpose and meaning side, no way. It just didn't fill that cup. It didn't fill that need that I didn't realize was being met by my military service. I got really depressed after leaving active duty for a couple months. And it wasn't until I started that first job that I was flying for a major U.S. airline that will for life just came back, and I was like, okay, like I'm back in it. I've got a team again. I'm doing it. But then I made the other veteran, not mistake, but common thing that happens, where 6 months later I quit. I very quickly, after a couple months flying, I was like, this isn't it. It doesn't check that box. It doesn't fill that purpose and meaning need. So my flip back to you is, when you're talking to retirees who are transitioning, from the active workforce to whatever they're going to do in retirement, besides the financial stuff, and we can get to that, but I'm more curious in the purpose and meaning stuff. Like how, and is that something that a conversation that you have with your clients?
Yeah, that's a big part of the ongoing conversation. And it varies client by client, or if it's a reader of the blog or a listener of the podcast, it varies person by person. Because I will say, there's some people who engage with me and they're like, Jesse, I just want you to run the math. I just want you to focus on the numbers. I come to you for financial advice. You're not my therapist. You're not my psychologist, which I get. But in most cases, over time, I can build enough trust to build enough of a relationship with someone to say like, hey, here's something we found with a lot of pre-retirees transitioning into retirement. What we found is, and there's some awesome data to back this up, what we found is most pre-retirees put their finances as one of, if not the top priority. But then when you talk to people who are 2 or 4 or 10 years into retirement, very few people still rank finances as their top priority. And almost all of them rank lifestyle issues is maybe what I'll say. It's a broad term, but lifestyle issues is their top priority. And it could be, right, what am I doing just to fill up my days? How am I maintaining my relationships? A huge one, a really good example. So you think about the workplace. The workplace, okay, yeah, it gave you that paycheck, and we can find a way to replace that paycheck. But you might not be thinking about the fact that it also just gave you this purpose, this drive to get out of bed every morning and to fulfill someone's need out there in the world. Like you enjoy doing that. That gave you purpose. Now you need to replace it. And the workplace probably also gave you a lot of socialization, whether they're your best friends or even sometimes if you're like, yeah, I don't love all my coworkers, but it's still nice to go chat with someone at the coffee machine in the morning. Well, you have to find a way to replace that in retirement. And newsflash, your wife or your husband might get sick of spending 12 hours a day with you at some point. So like shameless plug, episode 106, I took some of this data from Fritz Gilbert of the Retirement Manifesto. Shout out Fritz. It's called Retirees, Mistakes, and Wake-Up Calls, Expectations versus Reality. It was a deep dive on just this topic. It's a little varied, Spencer, but still there's a through line. Like there are some consistencies that you find over time having these conversations, and it's really big. It's so much more than just the finances.
I mean, the people who are listening to my podcast, right, they tend to be the optimizer in the relationship. They tend to be the spreadsheet nerd, the one who is like, we got to save $20 on Netflix because like run that compounding interest graph. Look how much it grows into. And my plea to them is you're going to be fine. The numbers are going to work. You have run 1,000, 10,000 Monte Carlo simulations, not over 20, 30, 40, 50-year time horizons, as long as the United States continues to exist in some form and capitalism continues to exist in some form and companies continue to pay their shareholders dividends, you will be fine. Set it all aside, buy your beans and bullets and your gold bars if you need to, but like you're going to be fine. Now what are you going to do? And people are just like, I'll figure it out. And like, no, you're not going to figure it out. I mean, you will, because everybody figures it out. But this is the hard question. The money stuff for most people, the people who are hiring financial advisors or who are the DIY, super DIY types that understand compounding interest and understand the point of tracking your dollars and making sure that every dollar has a job. It's great. Every dollar has a job, but what's your job? Like, what are you going to do when you've reached that financial independence or that financial freedom? And it's often ignored, both by the military service member who's transitioning to the civilian world, whether it's separation, medical retirement, 20-year retirement, or someone who's going from active duty to the Guard Reserves, which, again, I'll throw that out as a great option, as just kind of easing your transition, is when you're done with active duty. But if you enjoyed it, if you liked it, and if you want to be around those people, take a look at the Guard and Reserve. Usually their commitments are not that onerous, and you're still going to get to put on a uniform. You're still going to get a lot of that community. You're still going to be able to, like if your civilian job sucks, you just take active orders and go full time with the Guard or Reserve and come back later to your civilian job. Or you might get to the Guard and Reserve and be like, you know what? No, like I'm good. I did it. This is a nice transition, but I'm going to give these guys a year and then I'm going to be fully civilian. But at least you're kind of like taking a slow, measured approach to it and you're giving yourself time. And I think that's the thing that I want anybody who's retiring from the military or transitioning out of the military to the civilian world, or a civilian who's retiring. I just want to say, you're going to be fine, but it's going to take some time. And for some people, it's no time at all, right? Like they're like, no, I'm golfing every day and I'm so excited. And my wife, is going to go do whatever she's going to do. And we've got the grandkids nearby. And like, I talk to retirees all the time who are like, or people who are financially independent. You look at like Mr. Money Mustache or someone, and they always say like, I don't have time to work. Like my life is so full. I have so much going on. Like, I don't know how I had time for a job before this. And that's great. If that's your situation, that's great. And if that's not your situation and you've separated from the military, or you're retiring from a 40-year career in your 60s and you're going into a more traditional retirement as a civilian, it might take a couple of years. And there might be some dark moments in there of you staring at the ceiling at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, what did I do? Like, why? Like, what am I doing here? And it's a tough question, but it's okay if you don't get an answer immediately. And when you, in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, you might say, I still don't have an answer, but that's okay. I'm working on it. You might have an answer. You might say in the book, The Second Mountain, David Brooks talks about the 4 callings, and it's vocation. So like not just a job, but like, a passion, the work that you were meant to do in this world, or the Japanese
Ikigai.
The Ikigai, there you go. What you were meant to do. And then the other one is, there's 4 of them, religion, philosophy, community, and marriage. He kind of focuses on those. And for a lot of people, maybe they've neglected their marriage because of their work, or maybe they've not been involved in their religious community because they were busy doing other things and raising kids, and, life's busy. And, I see a lot of retirees. My wife's grandmother, for instance, turning 90 years old, and she's still in the church choir, right? Like, she still goes and sings every Sunday, and like her friends are there, and she talks to the pastor or the priest, and it's such a joy for her to have that part of her social calendar and have that part of her week. And that's something, the fact that she has the time to do that and go practice with them and be there on every Sunday, maybe that's something that you're interested in doing, and you just didn't have the time when you were working full time. And here you go. Here's this opportunity. Here's this gift. Don't squander it.
Yeah, a few different things that you were saying there, Spencer, just made me think of these two different metaphors that both oddly, coincidentally, have to do with our teenage years. Because, I can picture back to like being a high school freshman and heading into the summers off. Right now we're recording in early July. It's summer off for high school kids. And a lot of my friends and I had this mindset where it's like, oh, what are you going to do this summer? And it's like, I don't really know, just not school. That's the answer, just not school. And that's a good enough answer for that time in your life, because summer's 2 months long. And okay, if you don't have the most productive summer off, kind of like, who cares? But I feel like that is the mindset that some retirees go into retirement with. Like, what are you going to do? I don't know, not work. That's it. I'll figure it out. And not work is good enough because I didn't like work. And the answer of not work means I'm therefore going to like it. And that's just not the case, because the second metaphor is many of us can think back to this time in life where maybe we're 17, 18. Maybe we're debating, like, do I go to college? Do I go to the military? Do I get a job? Or maybe it happened right after college where it's like, do I go to grad school? Or for me, like, I got this 4-year degree in engineering. Do I even like being an engineer? And the point is, like, you don't quite feel settled in life, and you don't quite feel like you have this defined path in front of you, and you're just trying to figure it out. There's a parallel between that and the early years of retirement. Like, you're trying something new. It's a big life transition. And for the first time in decades, you've got nothing but time. It's a big deal. And it might take, just as you alluded to, it might take you some time to figure out where your path will take you and what feels good and what feels comfortable. But if you can do some of that work beforehand, that's where I think people tend to have some more retirement success, rather than just getting thrown into the deep end and hoping they can tread enough water to keep their head above water. If they ease their way into it by doing some work beforehand, usually there's a better result. I don't know if the same applied to military, transitioning out of the military, but I got to think a little bit of preparation can go a long way.
You just triggered a couple ideas there for the transitioning military service member. And the first one, the most practical and tactical advice I can give is there's a program called TAP, Transition Assistance Program. And when you're within a year of separation, so you've set a separation date, or retirement, you can start going to TAP classes. And usually it's 2 or 3 days, and they have like an entrepreneurship track and a civilian career track, and they'll give you a year free of LinkedIn Premium, which I hate LinkedIn, but there you go. I guess some people have leveraged it to succeed in life. But the TAP program, I went to one, and you have to go to one before you can separate. But that was a mistake. I think I should have gone probably as soon as I was eligible. So as soon as I was at 1 year out, just gone to like the 1 or 2 day course, and use that as an opportunity to get the brain juices flowing and thinking, okay, like, what is this going to look like? And I thought I was well prepared for my transition. I mean, we had a very large nest egg. We were essentially, if we weren't lean fire, we were coast fire. I mean, we were well on the path to just being straight up fire and possibly even fat fire in the next couple of years. And so financially, we were very well prepared. You know, I had a little bit of work to do with the podcast and the blog and the book, but there was still a lot of things that I hadn't quite figured out. And I don't know if I would have figured them out because I'd gone to a TAP class earlier, but at least I would have started kind of the process. And maybe instead of a couple months of wallowing in existential, and I could have shortened that a little bit. And so that would be my advice for someone separating from the military is go to the TAP program more than once. Just go twice and do it as soon as you are eligible for, and then do it a little bit closer to separation. Because the other thing is they dump so much information on you while you're in there that it's very hard to absorb it in one go around. And you're going to pick up, just like listening to one of Jesse's podcasts or my podcast, the second time you listen to the episode, you're going to glean even more information and different information. So I highly recommend that for transitioning military service members, you look at using the TAP program to your advantage.
And, there are similar versions here in civilian life, whether it's just like something as simple as a class at your community center or something from AARP, or, the really nice thing is so much financial content on the internet is written for the general audience. A lot of it is just free and out there, and you just have to go find it. But it is out there. But anyway, Spencer, you've mentioned a few times now your book, your blog, and of course your podcast, which I know I'm sure my military listeners are want to go find it. And maybe even some folks who are listening who they have friends in the military, they have children in the military, they're going to want to forward it on to the people they know. How can our listeners go out and find your work?
You could start at militarymoneymanual.com. That's the hub of the content universe of all my ramblings and rantings for the last, I think I started in 2012, so almost 13 years now at the time of this recording. And then if you enjoyed listening to my soniferous voice, then you can go to the Military Money Manual podcast, Spotify and Apple. Finally, you can find the book, which is creatively titled The Military Money Manual. And that's on Amazon and also at shop.militarymoneymanual.com. Check out all the versions there, audiobook and ebook and hardcover and everything. The podcast I do with my buddy Jamie. He's still active duty officer. We started it to promote the book, and it's just grown. And we're almost up to 200 episodes, so we're having too much fun doing it. And we've had some great guests on there, and we'll be publishing this episode on there as well. And so where can people find what you're working on?
Ooh, thank you for that. I wanted to give you a commendation. That's a military term, right? A commendation for branding consistency, Spencer. Excellent. The Military Money Manual, everywhere you look.
Everywhere you look.
The hub, if you will, for me is bestinterest.blog. That is my blog. That's where I do all my writing. And the homepage right there, bestinterest.blog, that's where people can sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is just an easy way that people can keep in touch with my new articles and my new podcast episodes. The podcast is available anywhere you're listening. If you're listening to it right now, you're at a good spot considering it is this podcast. Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors is the name. And right, we do deep dives on financial planning topics, tax planning topics, a little bit of the psychology that goes into long-term investing and retirement. So if you're looking to deep dive and learn more, it's a pretty good place to do that.
I love it when Money Podcast barely touch, I don't think we use any percentages or dollar amounts on the show, but then the dollar amounts and the math, and really there's so much more that goes into these questions. And the last thing I wanted to leave your listeners with, especially because we tend to be optimizers, but The 5 Types of Wealth by Sahil Bloom, I just read it. And for an optimizer, it's great because it gives you a different framework to measure yourself against rather than just what's the net worth? What's the net worth? What's my income? What's the tax rate? And for retirees especially, you're going to be gifted this opportunity of you're going to have more control. Hopefully, you're going to have more control of your time. And that's one of the 5 types of wealth that he talks about in there. I think it can give the person transitioning from a civilian job to civilian retirement or a military job to a military retirement. It can give you that framework of if you're rich in one area, if you're listening to this podcast, you might be rich in the financial wealth, but you might be impoverished in another category. And that just gives you, as an optimizer, now it's your job to increase your net worth, so to speak, in that other wealth category. So 5 Types of Wealth, Sahil Bloom. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend it to all your listeners.
Awesome. That's a great recommendation. Thank you, Spencer. Good to talk to you, man.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors. If you have a question for Jesse to answer on a future episode, send him an email over at his blog, The Best Interest. His email address is jesse@bestinterest.blog. Again, that's jesse@bestinterest.blog. Did you enjoy the show? Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen. This helps others find the show and invest in knowledge themselves. And we really appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next episode of Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors. Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors is a personal podcast meant for education and entertainment. It should not be taken as financial advice, and it's not prescriptive of your financial situation.